My name is Emma Thompson, and the only reason anyone knows that name now is because of what happened in a courtroom when the people who abandoned me stood before me fighting for money that was never theirs. I can still see their smug faces, still hear the scrape of chairs and the hush of voices. And I can still remember the moment the bailiff said, "All rise," and they turned expecting to see a judge who'd take their side. Instead, they saw me, their daughter, the girl they threw away sitting behind the bench in the black robe of justice. Their expressions shifted from confidence to disbelief, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in their eyes. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was a lifetime in the making, and to understand it I have to take you back to the day everything began. I was 6 years old. It was December, cold, slushy, and gray, the kind of winter day where the sky loses its color and breath turns into steam. My mother was wearing a cheap blue coat with a missing button, and my father smelled like cigarettes and impatience. We were at Fairview Supermarket, the big one on Maple Street, with waxed floors and fluorescent lights that buzzed like tired bees. I remember holding onto the edge of the metal shopping cart, my fingers cold, and I remember them walking fast, almost too fast for my short legs to keep up. My mother kept glancing around, not at me, but at the doors, at the employees, at escape routes. My father kept muttering under his breath, just do it quick, like he was ripping off a bandage, except the bandage was me. They reached the magazine aisle, ironic looking back right near the empty corner where cleaning supplies were stocked. My father crouched down and looked at me. For a moment I thought he was about to tie my shoe or wipe my face or something small and fatherly. Instead, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Stay right here. Don't move." My mother didn't even look at me. She was already walking away. And I, being 6, didn't understand. I thought maybe they found a cheaper store. Maybe they were coming back with a treat for me. Maybe anything except the truth. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. The store got busier, louder, crowded with carts and squeaking wheels. The lights seemed to hum louder. I remember the sudden sting in my gut when I realized I didn't see them anymore. I called out, "Mom." It came out like a tiny squeak, swallowed by the noise of the place. I waited. I said it louder. "Mom." And then louder, "Dad." The people around me glanced, frowned, looked away. I walked up and down the aisle. I scanned for the blue coat and cigarette smell. Nothing. Eventually, my breathing turned sharp and fast. My chest tightened. Tears blurred the world. I didn't know what abandonment was, but I could feel it. It was the feeling of suddenly becoming weightless, like the world had dropped me through invisible cracks. That's when I met Harold. I didn't know his name yet. I just saw an older man kneeling, so his eyes met mine. He had gentle wrinkles, kind blue eyes, and wore a worn brown jacket that smelled like old paper and pine. He held out a handkerchief, an actual cotton one, not a tissue, and said, "Hey there, sweetheart. You look lost." "Are you all right?" I couldn't speak. I just moved closer and clung to his coat because for some reason I trusted him instantly. He didn't rush me or ask too many questions. He just stayed with me until a store manager came over. They tried making announcements over the intercom. They asked me for names. They checked the parking lot. Eventually, they called the police. Hours passed. My parents never returned. The officers tried to reassure me, but I could see the pity in their faces. A social worker was called. Paperwork began. The system turned its gears. But through all of it, Harold stayed. He spoke calmly to the authorities. He offered to be a temporary guardian until something could be arranged. He made no dramatic promises, just steady, dependable presence. When I finally slept that night, it was in a guest room of his modest house. White lace curtains, faded furniture, the smell of lemon polish. I cried myself to sleep, but there was warmth instead of cold. Quiet instead of chaos. In the months that followed, I slowly learned to speak again, laugh again. Harold didn't force it. He just lived beside me. He taught me how to crack eggs for pancakes, how to rake leaves, how to plant tomatoes in the spring. He read me stories at night, real books, thick ones without pictures, and he gave me stability. So much stability that when the courts offered a foster care transition, he applied instead for full legal adoption. I still remember the judge asking me, "Do you want Mr. Thompson to be your father now?" And my tiny voice whispering, "He already is." I never heard from my biological parents again, not a letter, not a call, not a holiday card or apology. It was like they vanished into smoke. And for years, I assumed I would never see them again. But life has twists, and abandonment leaves echoes. As I tell you this part of the story, I want you to understand I didn't grow up bitter. I grew up grateful. Harold gave me love. He gave me wisdom. He gave me boundaries. He gave me family. What I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have known, was that he was also giving me a future far beyond anything I could imagine. And that one day I would be sitting in a courtroom seeing the same faces that left me behind, and they would be the ones looking small, forgotten, and terrified. But that comes later. For now the memory is simply this: a scared little girl in a supermarket aisle, abandoned and found. Part 1: The Abandonment, plus 1043 words. Ban dyan noi continue ChatGPT dyan noi. I grew up in Harold's house not as a guest, not as a charity case, but as someone truly wanted. His home wasn't fancy, just a single-story brick house on a quiet street with maple trees that turned amber every fall. There was a creaking porch swing, a flag mounted by the door, and inside shelves of old books mixed with framed medals from his years in the army. Harold wasn't the talkative type, but when he spoke, every word carried weight. He had the kind of steady voice people listen to without thinking about it. In those early years, I clung to him like a shadow. I followed him through the house from the kitchen to the yard, asking questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Where does snow come from? Do cats have dreams? He never laughed at me, never brushed me aside. He answered every question with the same patient respect he would have given an adult. That patience formed the bedrock of my trust. One of my earliest memories of living with Harold was the morning he made pancakes. He set me on a stool by the counter and handed me a bowl. 2 eggs, he said, cracking them with one hand. Beat 'em like they owe you money. I giggled, not because I fully understood the joke, but because he made me feel safe enough to laugh. He let me mix the batter even though I splattered half of it on the counter. He told me, "In cooking and in living, you learn by making messes." Harold never spoiled me, no mountains of toys or unnecessary treats, but he gave me something much rarer: stability. Every morning breakfast at 7:30. On Sundays, we went to the same church, sitting in the same pew. He didn't push religion on me, but he believed in community and shared moral understanding. After service, we'd talk with neighbors, then head home to tend the yard or read together. When I started school, Harold walked me to the bus stop. I remember clutching his hand tightly, afraid of being left again. He bent down and looked me in the eye. "Emma, I am not leaving you. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." Those words became the anchor of my childhood. As I got older, Harold encouraged independence. Around age 11, he gave me chores: vacuuming, dishwashing, sorting laundry. He said those who can take care of a home can take care of themselves. He taught me respect through habit, not punishment. If I broke something, he showed me how to fix it. If I failed a test, we sat at the table until I understood the material. He didn't yell. He never shamed me. But he expected effort. When I reached middle school, I learned about my past in fragmented bits. One afternoon, I asked Harold directly, "Do you think my parents loved me?" He didn't answer immediately. He took off his glasses, wiped them with a cloth, and said gently, "I think some people love themselves so much that they forget how to love others." He never called them bad people, just broken ones. In high school, I discovered law. It began with a civics teacher who assigned mock trials. I loved the structure, the rhythm of objections and arguments, the weight of truth measured against persuasion. Harold noticed my interest. "You have a mind for justice," he said, "but more importantly, you have a heart for it." He supported everything I chased academically. When I joined debate club, he showed up to every competition. When I won my first local contest, the smile on his face was as grand as if I'd climbed Everest. College was the real test. I got accepted to Ohio State, and Harold insisted I go, even though I worried about leaving him alone. "Go," he said firmly. "Grow. I'll be here when you come back." True to his word, Every Thanksgiving, every winter break, he waited at the front door with the porch light on, waving like he was greeting a soldier coming home from war. During college, I met people who questioned my past. "You don't ever want to find your real parents?" they asked. The phrase stung every time. Real parents. As if biology alone gave legitimacy to love. I didn't bother to explain. I didn't need to. Harold was real. Harold was enough. Law school came next, then internship, then clerkship. I grew into adulthood one case file at a time. Sometimes during late nights at the library, I'd think of Harold making hot cocoa in the kitchen, humming softly, waiting for me to walk through the door. That memory fueled my determination. By the time I completed my judicial qualifications, Harold was older, slower in movement, but still sharp in mind. We sat together on the porch swing one summer evening as fireflies twinkled across the lawn. He squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, Emma," he said. "You turned pain into purpose." I didn't know it then, but that was one of the last long talks we would share. Harold passed away peacefully 2 months later in his sleep. The house felt unbearably quiet without him. I wandered from room to room, touching pictures, books, tools, every object a reminder of the man who built me into someone strong. And then came the revelation, wrapped in documentation, sealed envelopes, estate files. Harold Thompson, simple homeowner, was a silent billionaire. Stocks, property, bonds, trust accounts, investments that had matured over decades, and almost all of it, $20 million of it, was left to me. But the money wasn't the real shock. It was the message he wrote in his will to Emma, my daughter, by love, not by blood. May this help her help others. I cried so hard reading those words that I soaked half the document with tears. That inheritance wasn't wealth, it was a legacy, a responsibility. And that responsibility would eventually draw attention. Attention from people I never wished to see again. People who had left me behind in a supermarket aisle. They were alive. They were watching. And when they learned who I had become, they crawled back out of whatever shadows they'd been living in. But that is the next chapter of this story. Part 2. Love, Values, and Education. +1 0 to 25 words. Ban Janoi continue ChatGPT Janoi. Harold's death felt like a curtain closing on the first act of my life. In the days after the funeral, I walked through the rooms of the house, his house, our house, with a kind of numb reverence. The air felt too still, too hollow, without the subtle sounds of Harold moving around, humming under his breath, clearing his throat softly as he read the paper. I kept expecting to hear his steps on the floorboards, or the crinkle of his jacket when he returned from the porch. But silence had taken his place. The will reading took place in a small office in downtown Columbus. It was warm inside, dust-speckled sunlight slanting through half-open blinds, the smell of old leather chairs, and the faint scent of a peppermint candle. Harold's attorney, a gentle-faced man named Richard Cole, adjusted his glasses as he opened the folder. I sat across from him, hands clasped tightly, heart-heavy. I assumed there would be property, a savings account, maybe a modest retirement fund. I was not prepared. Richard cleared his throat. "Emma, Harold left you all of it." I blinked. All of what? Everything. He began listing assets, real estate holdings, multiple investment accounts, long-term stocks, portions of company shares I'd never heard of, and a trust that had been accruing value since before I was born. It felt surreal, like he was describing someone else's life, someone else's fortune. When he spoke the number $20 million, I froze. My breath caught in my throat. "That's not possible," I whispered. Harold lived simply. His car was old, his house was average. He clipped coupons from the newspaper. Richard smiled kindly. "Your father," the word father hit me with a soft ache, believed that true wealth should grow quietly, not shout loudly. But what truly broke me wasn't the number. It was the final letter Harold had written specifically for me. Richard handed it over carefully, and his voice softened. "Take your time with this." I unfolded the cream-colored paper, recognizing Harold's neat handwriting instantly. "Emma, you were the greatest gift of my life. I did not need fortune or legacy until you came into my world. You gave me purpose, and I wanted to give you a future. Use this not to indulge, but to empower. Help others as I helped you. Be strong, be fair, and let the world know that love makes families, not DNA. My daughter by Love, Dad. I didn't just cry, my body trembled with sobs. Richard politely stepped out of the room to give me privacy. I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." The word felt like prayer. In the months that followed, I made decisions carefully. I kept working in law. My position as a judge was not something I would abandon for wealth. I bought nothing extravagant. I paid off Harold's lingering medical bills, even though they were modest. I put a portion into charitable foundations, supporting foster children adoption services and youth legal advocacy. I funded legal aid programs for abandoned and neglected kids. Every check I signed felt like a conversation with Harold. You gave to me, now I give to them. During this period, something interesting happened. I thought about my biological parents less and less. Harold had filled the space where resentment might have grown, but fate has its own timing. It was a crisp autumn morning when the first ripple appeared. I was drinking coffee beside the window in my kitchen when I noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. 2 people inside, just sitting. I brushed it off at first, but the car came back the next day, and the day after that. Then I received a letter, a plain envelope with no return address. Inside one line, "We need to talk, your parents." I stared at the words, feeling disbelief twist into a cold knot in my stomach. They had found me. After almost 30 years. They wanted something. I didn't respond. Weeks later, a process server delivered official documents to the courthouse where I worked. I looked down and read the lawsuit, a claim that I was not the rightful beneficiary, that Harold had unduly influenced me, and that my biological parents had a natural and legal right to part of the estate. Seeing their signatures at the bottom hit me with a strange sensation. Familiar names tied to unfamiliar people. People I barely remembered except as shadows walking away from me in a supermarket aisle. Still, I didn't react with anger. Not yet. Instead, I read through every line of their complaint. It was full of emotional framing. We were young, we were desperate, we always planned to return. They painted themselves as heartbroken parents crushed by circumstance. But as a judge, I knew the weight of truth, and truth wasn't written in their petition. My co-workers began whispering. News spreads fast in legal circles. A detective I knew asked if I was all right. I answered calmly, "Legally, I'm fine. Morally, I'll need time." At home that night, I sat on the porch swing where Harold once sat with me, and I let the memories wash over the laughter, the lessons, the love. I held Harold's letter again and read the phrase that anchored me. "You gave me purpose." That purpose hadn't changed. I would defend his legacy not out of greed, but gratitude. I hired legal counsel not because I couldn't represent myself, but because I believed in the impartiality of legal process. I wanted this handled cleanly, formally, transparently. But before the trial began, something unexpected happened. I received another letter, this time handwritten, the tone different, angrier. "You owe us. You wouldn't even be alive if it weren't for us." That sentence crystallized something in me. A resolve, a clarity. They were not seeking reconciliation. They were seeking reward. They weren't looking for a daughter. They were hunting for a payday. And in that moment, any old flicker of maybe they changed died. I wasn't the girl in the supermarket anymore. I was a grown woman. I was Harold's daughter. I was a judge. And I was ready. Part 3. Harold's passing and the billionaire revelation, plus 1042 words. Ban Janoi continue ChatGPT Janoi? They didn't show up in person at first, only through motions, filings, affidavits. But I knew it was only a matter of time before they appeared physically like ghosts, walking back into a house they abandoned long ago. The first time I saw them again, truly saw them, was outside the courthouse on the day of the preliminary hearing. They were standing beside their attorney, a slick, overconfident man named Martin Lowell, with hair too perfect and a smile too sharp. My mother was dressed in a too bright red jacket, trying to appear dignified. My father looked older, gaunter, but still carried the same restless agitation I remembered from that December day long ago. Their eyes landed on me, and I saw it immediately. Not recognition of a child they lost, but calculation, valuation, a living asset they wished to reclaim. I walked past them without greeting, without flinching. I wasn't cruel, but I also wasn't theirs. Inside the courtroom was quiet, polished, solemn. I sat beside my legal counsel, a steady and trustworthy attorney named Linda Harris. She whispered, "You prepared?" I nodded. Prepared wasn't the right word. I was resolute. The hearing began. Lowell stood and began painting his clients as victims of circumstance. They were impoverished, desperate, emotionally overwhelmed. They never intended permanent abandonment. They believed Emma would be found and cared for until they were able to return for her. I watched my mother dab fake tears from her eyes. My father shifted dramatically, shaking his head, as if still haunted by the pain of losing me. That performance might have worked on a different audience, but I knew better. And so did some of the people in that room. A few glanced subtly at me, aware of my history, aware of my work. They didn't see lost parents, they saw opportunists. When it was Linda's turn, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't posture. She simply spoke the truth. Emma Thompson was abandoned at age 6. Not temporarily misplaced, not momentarily forgotten, abandoned. The parents never returned, never checked on her, never attempted contact, never made inquiries through local authorities, foster networks, or legal channels. Their return coincided only after the inheritance was public knowledge. Their motives are transparent. As she spoke, I watched my biological parents. Their discomfort betrayed them. They knew everyone knew what this was. After the hearing, they approached me in the hallway. My mother spoke first. "Emma, honey, we always loved you. I held up a hand. "Stop." My voice was steady, controlled, judicial. "You didn't love me. You left me." My father stepped forward, voice straining with false emotion. "We were kids. We didn't know how to raise a child." "You didn't try," I replied. And before they could offer more excuses, I turned away and walked out. Over the next weeks, preparation for the full trial intensified. Witnesses were contacted. Records resurfaced. The social worker from my childhood, an older woman now but sharp as ever, provided testimony about the abandonment. Employees from the supermarket recalled the announcement over the intercom. Harold's neighbors volunteered statements describing our family bond. Everything built a chain of credibility linking past to present. Meanwhile, I kept working. I presided over cases. I upheld the law. But I was careful to avoid involvement in my own. I wouldn't allow even the perception of bias or influence. That mattered to me, not just legally but morally. I wouldn't become the thing I despised. The night before the trial officially commenced, I received one more message, this time a voicemail. It was my mother's voice. Soft, trembling, but not with love. With desperation. "Emma, please. We have nothing. We're struggling. You have more than you need. Just help us. Just think about family." I listened to it twice, and both times I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just clarity. The next morning the courtroom was full. Spectators, journalists, legal observers. It wasn't officially publicized, but word had traveled. Interest gathered like static. I entered through a side entrance, escorted discreetly. When I stepped inside, my parents were already seated at the plaintiff's table. They looked anxious now, not confident. Their lawyer kept his hand on my mother's shoulder in a show of support designed for optics. The bailiff called the court to order. Another judge, Judge Reynolds, took the bench. The irony was not lost on anyone. I often sat where he sat. Today I was simply a defendant and a witness. Role reversal, perhaps. But truth was constant. The trial began with opening arguments. Lowell spoke dramatically of blood ties, human mistakes, second chances. Linda followed with precision, grounding every point in evidence and law. Then came witness testimonies. The social worker, Mrs. Patterson, described the day she first met me, a small, shaking girl with wide eyes and unanswered questions. The supermarket manager recalled how announcements were made repeatedly with no response. Neighbors testified to Harold's absolute dedication as a father. But the most emotional testimony came from me. As I took the stand, I noticed my biological mother leaning forward as if hoping for a sentimental breakthrough. My father clasped his hands, waiting for emotional leverage. I looked at them both before speaking, not to connect with them, but to sever any lingering power they thought they had. I do not hate my biological parents, I began. I do not seek revenge. But abandonment is not an accident, it is an action. And responsibility is not something we inherit, it is something we accept. Harold Thompson accepted that responsibility. He did not share my DNA. But he shared my life. He gave me guidance, he gave me love, and he gave me a future. My parents did none of those things. Yet the full verdict was still to come. Part 4. The Return of the Biological Parents and Their Greed, plus 1039 words. Ban Jan Noi continue ChatGPT Jan Noi. The public didn't know the verdict yet, but the energy in that courtroom had shifted long before the decision was rendered. By the time my testimony ended, something in the air had hardened, like the truth had crystallized, and people could feel it. Still, legality must run its course. The defense and plaintiff rested. The judge adjourned for deliberation. Outside cameras waited like vultures. On the courthouse steps, reporters buzzed with questions I ignored as I stepped into a waiting car. I spent the night alone, not because I was lonely, but because I needed stillness. I brewed chamomile tea instead of my usual black coffee. I sat by the living room window looking out at the quiet street, the orange glow of street lamps, the gentle drift of leaves in the wind. I thought not about money or inheritance or public perception, but about Harold. I imagined how he would have handled all this with dignity, with calm, with humility, so I tried to do the same. The final day arrived. The courtroom was full again, more so than before. Word had spread. Curiosity had grown. I took my seat. My parents sat across the room. They looked small today, deflated. My mother's makeup was heavier, as if to mask the anxiety beneath her skin. My father sat rigid, jaw-clenched fingers tapping anxiously against the table. Judge Reynolds entered and everyone stood. He wasted no time. In the matter of estate inheritance and parental claim, the court finds that the biological parents of Emma Thompson relinquished their legal and custodial rights through the act of abandonment. Their claim to the estate holds no legal standing. A wave of quiet rippled through the audience. My parents' lawyer sunk slightly, the facade falling away. Reynolds continued. The entirety of Harold Thompson's estate shall remain with Emma Thompson, as stipulated clearly in the will. My mother's mouth fell open. My father's face reddened, stiffening in anger or panic. But the judge wasn't done. This court further finds no grounds to support retroactive parental entitlement. The plaintiffs are dismissed with prejudice. That was the final blow. They couldn't even file again. Then came the moment I mentioned at the very beginning, the moment that now lives in the memory of every person who witnessed it. The judge turned slightly toward me with a respectful nod. Judge Thompson, thank you for your professionalism in distancing yourself from this case. Your conduct honors this court. My parents flinched. Because in that instant the court acknowledged me not just as a legal adult, not just as Harold's daughter, but as a judge they had unknowingly tried to exploit. As the court adjourned, the words echoed again in my memory, the bailiff's voice. All rise. And my parents stood, facing me. Their daughter. The same one they abandoned in a supermarket aisle. Their expressions were a portrait of stunned disbelief, like the world had shifted beneath their feet. Because it had. Outside the courtroom they cornered me. Their lawyer drifted away, sensing the futility. My mother spoke first. The softness she tried to conjure had vanished. You really wouldn't share a cent after everything. I turned to her. Everything you mean, abandonment, silence, absence. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. My father snarled, You owe us. We brought you into this world. I met his gaze steadily, and Harold brought me through it. That silenced him. As they backed away, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt resolved, like a wound had finally been sewn shut. But the story didn't end in that courthouse hallway. It continued in the conversations that followed. Colleagues congratulated me quietly. A few even admitted they were adopted themselves or foster kids, and they understood. Some reporters pushed for interviews. I declined them all. Because this wasn't a media drama, it was a human one. Later that night, I stood at Harold's grave, a modest granite stone beneath an old oak tree. I placed fresh flowers and rested my fingers against the carving of his name. "Dad," I whispered, "they tried, but they couldn't erase what you built." I sat beside the grave as the sun set, letting memories move through me like warm wind. I remembered sitting on his shoulders at a 4th of July parade. I remembered the smell of cinnamon toast on winter mornings. I remembered the pride in his eyes when I was sworn in as a judge. "You did good, Emma," I could almost hear him say. But the closure was not just personal, it was professional. In the months after the trial, I handled cases involving family disputes, custody battles, foster care appeals. I treated every child with the compassion Harold showed me. I recognized the quiet trauma behind abandoned eyes. I didn't just interpret the law, I applied it with humanity. Years later, sometimes people ask me how I managed not to seek retaliation or retribution. The truth is, the verdict was never about vengeance, it was about validation. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands tall and says, "This is what's right." I never saw my biological parents again after that day. Maybe they left the state. Maybe they sank back into obscurity. Maybe they're still bitter. But bitterness, I've learned, is just another kind of prison. I chose freedom. And that freedom let me live as Harold's daughter, not by birth, but by love, and by choice. Part 5: Courtroom Conflict and the Revelation of Identity. +1 031 words. Ban dyan noi continue ChatGPT dyan noi? The months after the verdict felt like learning to breathe again. Not because I had been suffocating, but because something unnoticed had been constricting me all these years, the unanswered question of whether I had been wanted. Now I knew beyond doubt I had been chosen. Harold chose me. And the law had affirmed it. The moral compass of the world for a moment had pointed true north. But the emotional aftermath wasn't instantaneous. People like to imagine that closure arrives with fanfare wrapped cleanly in a court ruling. Real life is gentler, slower, more complicated. Some mornings I'd wake with a heaviness in my chest, a decades-old echo of a girl in a supermarket aisle calling for parents who never came back. Other mornings, I woke with a sense of profound calm, remembering Harold reading the newspaper, humming quietly as sunlight warmed the dining room. I filled my days with work, not out of avoidance, but out of purpose. Sitting in my office reading through custody appeals and guardianship petitions, I found myself lingering longer on cases involving children caught between worlds. I understood them not in theory, but in bone and memory. About 6 weeks after the verdict, I received a letter not from either of my biological parents, but from a sibling I never knew existed. The envelope was hand-addressed, and inside was a single page. "I'm your brother. I was born 5 years after you. I didn't know about you until recently. I'm sorry for what happened. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in that family agreed with what they did." There was no return address, just a first name, Michael. I sat with that letter for a long time, feeling something stir. Not bitterness, just curiosity and a quiet ache. I didn't respond, not because I didn't care, but because I wasn't ready. The door to my past had closed, but apparently not all the way. One crisp Saturday morning in November, I went to Harold's house, or rather my house. I walked through each room, touching the familiar textures, the grain of the dining table, the cool steel of the kitchen sink, the worn fabric of Harold's armchair. I sat in that chair, let my head rest back, and closed my eyes. I could almost feel his presence like a warm blanket laid over my shoulders. What would Harold say if he were here? I knew. He would say, "Let go, Emma," not of memory, but of expectation. So I did. I stopped wondering if my biological parents ever felt regret. I stopped replaying their excuses. I stopped imagining alternate outcomes. Instead, I chose gratitude for a man who taught me that family isn't a genetic obligation, but a chosen bond. A few months later, something unexpected happened. I was approached by a nonprofit organization seeking keynote speakers for an event supporting foster care reform. They said your story could help others. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure I wanted my past displayed publicly, But then I remembered Harold's words, "Help others as I helped you." So I agreed. Standing at that podium facing a room of foster parents, social workers, advocates, and most importantly young adults who had cycled through the system, I spoke not as a judge, but as someone who had been lost and found. I was left behind, I said, but one person saw me not as a burden or a statistic, but as a child worth loving. That changed my life. And each of you, by choosing to care, are creating futures that children may not even imagine yet. Afterward, people came up to embrace me. One young woman, maybe 19 or 20, said through tears, "I always wondered if any of us ever made it." "You did." I hugged her tightly. "You will too," I said. Word of that speech reached beyond the room. Local papers wrote about it. A radio interview followed. A television invitation came, one I politely declined. I didn't want sensationalism. I wanted sincerity. And sincere people showed up, volunteers, donors, mentors. My quiet story became a quiet wave moving outward. On the first anniversary of Harold's passing, I visited his grave again. This time I brought a folded sheet of paper, a letter I'd written to him. "Dad, your love protected me when I was small, guided me when I grew, and continues to shape the way I serve others. I hope I am doing right by you. If love is the measure, you raised me in abundance. Emma." I read it aloud softly, letting the words drift among the leaves. Walking back to my car, I sensed someone watching. I turned and saw a man, late 20s, tall, uncertain, standing a few paces away. He lifted a hand almost timidly. "Emma," he asked. There was something familiar in his eyes. "Michael," I replied. He nodded. The moment was fragile, like stepping onto thin ice, but instead of breaking, it held. We spoke quietly by the cemetery entrance. He told me he had been raised mostly by relatives, that our parents had drifted through unstable lives, that my disappearance was buried in family silence. He wasn't there to ask for money or absolution. He just wanted to meet the sister he never knew. And I, perhaps because of Harold's influence, didn't turn him away. We spent an hour walking among the graves, talking about childhoods that diverged, about families that fracture, about the quiet resilience required to grow in shadow and still reach for sunlight. When we parted, it was with no promises, just possibility. That night I sat on the porch swing, once more wrapped in a blanket, gazing at the stars. The world felt large again, not threatening, but full of room. I realized something: revenge had never been the real story. Healing was. Harold had planted that seed in me, and now it was bearing fruit. I slept peacefully that night. Part 6. The Verdict and Emotional Aftermath, plus 1044 words. Ban dyan noi continue ChatGPT dyan noi. Part of me assumed that life would gently return to routine after that, but something had shifted inside me, something profound. The courtroom victory had closed one door, but healing had quietly opened another. I began to think more often about what Harold truly intended when he left that inheritance, not just the money but the charge, the responsibility. He didn't give me $20 million to sit on a throne of security. He gave it so I could build something he himself never had time to. So I did. The first step was transforming Harold's house, not by remodeling it or making it grand, but by honoring its spirit. I established a charitable foundation in his name, the Harold Thompson Trust for Abandoned and At-Risk Youth. I converted one of the spare rooms into an office, not a cold administrative space, but a warm one filled with photos of Harold, books he loved, and drawings children sent me. I hired staff people with compassion, not just credentials. Our mission was direct legal aid, emotional counseling, emergency foster placement, and mentorship support. And as our work expanded, I watched something beautiful happen. Former foster kids, now adults, came back to volunteer. Retired school teachers offered tutoring. Judges, attorneys, therapists began offering pro bono hours. Harold's quiet legacy became a network of kindness. At the same time, I found myself deepening my judicial philosophy. I treated every child in every case as if Harold himself were standing beside me. When I presided over adoption hearings, I felt a quiet joy. When I saw reunification handled responsibly, I felt hope. When I saw biological families taking accountability and building better homes, I felt compassion. And when I saw manipulation or neglect, I acted firmly. But never from bitterness, only from clarity. I also continued meeting Michael not often but meaningfully. We agreed to proceed slowly without pressure or obligations. He told me about his upbringing, the instability, the moves, the emotional fragility that hovered through his childhood. There were no fairy tale reunions in his life, but he had found resilience through music friends and eventually his own small career. I listened without judgment, grateful for the chance to know him. One afternoon we sat on the porch swing and I finally asked him gently, "Do they talk about me?" "Our parents," he sighed. "They talk about money, not about you." It didn't hurt, it simply clarified. "They're not evil," he added thoughtfully. "They're damaged. And sometimes damaged people do damage to others." I nodded slowly. "I don't hate them. I just don't need them." Michael understood. We didn't become instant siblings, but we became something real, two adults forging a connection forward, not backward. And that felt right. Months turned to years, and Harold's trust grew. We helped hundreds of children, some only temporarily, some permanently, some in dramatic rescues, some in humble paperwork. I never viewed myself as a savior. I was just a continuation of a kindness that had once saved me. Yet I carried one more loose thread inside me, a question. Not about my parents, not about money, but about Harold. Did I ever truly thank him? In life I did. In actions I did. But emotionally, spiritually. One quiet evening long after sunset, I walked to the cemetery again. I brushed away a few fallen leaves and knelt by his stone. The cold air nipped at my face. Slowly, I rested my hand against the granite. "Dad," I whispered, "I hope I became the kind of person you believed I could be." In the stillness, I felt something like the echo of his warmth, the memory of his steady hand on my shoulder. And I knew the answer wasn't in words. It was in living. As I stood and turned to leave, a couple with a small foster child approached the nearby rows. The boy clung to the woman's hand shyly. The man gave me a polite nod. "Evening, Judge Thompson." I nodded back, smiling softly. They didn't know my story. They didn't need to. My life was no longer defined by abandonment, but by affirmation. That night, sitting again on the porch swing, I reflected on the full arc of it, all the supermarket aisle, the adoption, the education, the inheritance, the trial, the healing. It no longer felt like a story about revenge. It felt like a story about reclamation, the reclaiming of identity, of love, of destiny. Harold hadn't just saved me from neglect. He saved me for something, and I spent every day honoring that gift. And so now, as I share this story with you, not as a legal drama, but as a human one, I ask you to reflect. Think about the ways love changes lives. Think about the unexpected families we create. Think about the small kindnesses that ripple into legacies. If you've ever raised a child not biologically yours, if you've ever mentored someone who needed guidance, if you've ever opened your heart to someone others overlooked, then you have already lived the truth of this story. I hope Harold's legacy inspires you to help someone, or forgive someone, or simply appreciate the quiet heroes in your own life. Thank you for listening, for feeling this with me, and for carrying the message forward. If this story touched you, I invite you gently, humbly to share it, to subscribe for more true stories of resilience and humanity, and to remind someone today that love, not blood, is what makes a family. The end. Part 7, Reconciliation, Legacy and Moral Resolution, +1049 words.